The morning Harlan Briggs decided to burn down Rosewood Mercantile, he wore his good boots. That detail stuck with people afterward. The fact that he had taken time to polish them, to tuck his shirt clean, to ride into Millfield looking like a man attending a social call rather than a man arriving to destroy a woman's livelihood. He tied his horse at the post outside, walked through the door of Lillian Harper's flower shop without knocking, and placed both hands flat on her counter the way a man does when he wants you to understand he is not asking. "Close the shop," Harlan said. "By Friday, or I close it for you." Lillian didn't move. Behind her, jars of creek water held stems of purple asters and white clover. The whole room smelled like cut grass and something sweet underneath it. "This is my shop," she said. Harlan smiled. It was the kind of smile that had nothing warm in it. Not for much longer. He picked up one of her small bouquets from the counter display, looked at it the way a man looks at something worthless, and set it back down sideways. Then he walked out. 3 weeks later, Lillian would understand exactly what he meant. But that morning, she stood alone in her flower shop with her heart hammering and her hands completely still, and she thought about the one customer who had never once made her feel small. She thought about Elias Ward. If this story already has your heart, hit that like button right now. Drop the name of your city or country in the comments so I can see how far these Wyoming wildflowers have traveled. And subscribe so you don't miss a single chapter of what happens next. Some of the best stories don't announce themselves. They just keep showing up, week after week, the same as he did. Elias Ward had been coming into Rosewood Mercantile every Friday afternoon for 3 years before Lillian Harper allowed herself to truly wonder about him. That was not laziness on her part. It was survival. A woman running a small shop alone in Millfield, Wyoming in 1884 learned quickly that wondering too much about the men who came through her door led to complications she did not have the energy to manage. She kept her interactions efficient. She took their money, wrapped their purchases, thanked them, and moved on. But Elias was difficult to file away neatly. He arrived every Friday between 2 and 3 in the afternoon, always on the same aging gray horse, always wearing the same canvas jacket with the collar turned up, whether the weather called for it or not. He never browsed. He came straight to the counter, waited without fidgeting while she prepared the bouquet he never had to describe because it never changed. Purple asters, white clover, yellow creek blossoms when she had them, meadow grass to fill the space. And he paid with exact coin, which she appreciated, because most men in town handed her paper money and expected her to make change from a drawer that wasn't always flush. He never made small talk. He never complained about prices. He never lingered. What he did do, every single Friday without exception, was hold that bouquet with a particular kind of care. Not the careful handling of a man afraid of looking foolish with flowers in his hands. Something else. Something more deliberate. Like the flowers were not a purchase, but a responsibility. That was the thing she couldn't file away. Lillian had watched men buy flowers in this shop for 6 years, since her mother passed and left her the business. She had watched men buy flowers for women they were courting, flowers they were obligated to bring, flowers selected with the cheerful randomness of someone who just needed something to hand over at a dinner table. She knew what each of those looked like. Elias Ward didn't look like any of them. The town offered her fragments of his story the way towns always did, in pieces, through different mouths, none of them the whole picture. She knew he had a ranch east of town on the flatland before the foothills started. She knew he worked it alone. She knew his wife had died, though nobody seemed comfortable saying exactly when or how, the way people get uncomfortable around a grief they consider too private to discuss openly. 3 years of Fridays, 3 years of the same bouquet, 3 years of exact coin and no conversation, and that careful, deliberate way of carrying wildflowers that she could not explain away. The October morning. Harlan Briggs came into her shop and set that bouquet down sideways. Something shifted in Lillian. She couldn't have named it precisely. But that afternoon, when the bell above her door rang at 2:10 and Elias Ward walked in with his collar turned up against a wind that wasn't particularly cold, she looked at him differently than she had the Friday before. She had a question she had been holding back for 3 years, and she was tired of holding it. She started preparing his bouquet the same as always, her hands moving through the familiar work while her mind ran ahead of her. Purple asters. White clover. The yellow creek blossoms were finished for the season, so she had substituted small sprigs of goldenrod that gave the arrangement a slightly warmer tone. She set the bouquet on the counter. She took his coin, and then before he could pick up the flowers and turn toward the door, she asked it, "Who are they for?" Elias Ward went still. Not the stillness of a man surprised by a rude question. Not irritation. He went still the way water goes still when the wind drops, completely, suddenly, as if the whole air around him had changed temperature. He looked at her. She wasn't sure he had ever actually looked at her before. His eyes were darker than she expected, and there was something in them that she recognized before she had words for it, because she had seen it in the mirror often enough in the years after her mother died. "My wife," he said. His voice was low and careful, like a man speaking around something breakable. Lillian waited. She had learned that particular kind of silence, the kind that comes after a first answer and means the whole answer isn't finished yet. After a moment, he said, "Her name was Amelia. She's been gone 3 years." The shop was very quiet. Outside, a wagon rolled past on the dirt road. Somewhere down the street, 2 men were arguing about something with the comfortable loudness of people who weren't actually angry. "I'm sorry," Lillian said. She meant it plainly, without decoration. Elias picked up the bouquet. He held it the way he always held it. "She liked wildflowers," he said they were more honest than roses. Then he walked out. Lillian stood at her counter for a long moment after the bell stopped swinging. She pressed her palms flat against the wood and thought about a man who had been bringing flowers to a grave for 3 years every Friday without telling a single person why. She thought, that is either the saddest thing I've ever heard or the most faithful, maybe both things at once. She was still thinking about it when she remembered Harlan Briggs and his polished boots and the bouquet he had set down sideways, and she felt the 2 thoughts sit uncomfortably close together. One man who kept showing up, one man who showed up to threaten her. She went back to work. The following Friday, Lillian did something she had not planned and could not entirely explain afterward. She added lavender to his bouquet. She told herself it was a practical decision. She had an abundance of dried lavender from a late-season cutting, and it paired naturally with the asters without overpowering them. She told herself it was the kind of small variation any florist might make. She was not entirely convinced by her own reasoning, but she went ahead with it. When Elias came in at his usual time, she set the bouquet on the counter. He looked at it for a moment without touching it. "Lavender," he said. "I had extra," she said. "It won't cost you more." He looked at her again with that direct, unguarded quality she was beginning to recognize as simply how he looked at things. Without deflection, without the practiced social ease most men developed as a kind of armor. "Amelia grew lavender," he said, "in a pot on the windowsill. Couldn't get it to grow outside in the wind, so she put it in a clay pot and kept it inside." He paused. "I don't know what happened to the pot after she died. I think I gave it to Dorothy Meacham because I couldn't look at it." Lillian absorbed this. She nodded once. "She would have liked it in the bouquet then," Lillian said. He was quiet for a moment. Then the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, not the performance of one, but the real small version that people make when something touches them before they can stop it. "Yeah," he said. "She would have." He paid and left. Lillian watched him through the window, his back to her as he untied his horse, the bouquet held in one arm with that same deliberate care. The lavender would be in every bouquet from that Friday forward. Neither of them discussed it. It became part of the arrangement the same way the asters and the clover were part of it, simply present, taken for granted as right. The trouble with Harlan Briggs announced itself formally, about 2 weeks after his first visit, in the form of a notice delivered by his associate, a wiry man named Culberson, who smelled of tobacco and seemed personally offended by the requirement to hand paperwork to a woman. The notice informed Lillian that the building housing Rosewood Mercantile had been purchased by Briggs Land and Property Holdings, and that her current lease arrangement, which had existed through a verbal agreement with old Mr. Tatum, who had owned the building before his death 8 months ago, was not considered legally binding under the terms of the new ownership. She had 30 days to either sign a new lease at a rate 3 times her current payment or vacate the premises. Lillian read the notice twice. Then she set it face down on her counter and stood very still with her hands in her apron pockets while she decided what she was going to do. She had seen this before, not to herself, but to others. Harlan Briggs had been working through the commercial properties along the main street of Millfield for 2 years now, and he had a pattern. He found the soft spots, the verbal agreements, the handshake deals, the arrangements that existed on trust rather than paper, and he pressed on them until they gave. He wasn't the only man in Wyoming doing it. He was just the one doing it in Millfield. The flower shop was not a soft spot in any way that felt soft from the inside. Lillian had been here 6 years. She knew every customer, every supplier, every seasonal rhythm of what sold and what didn't. She had built the business from the loose collection of inventory and goodwill her mother had left into something that actually turned a profit most months. But she had been operating on Mr. Tatum's goodwill in a monthly payment she handed over without any paper attached to it, because that was how Mr. Tatum had preferred to operate. And she had never pushed for anything more formal, because everything had always been fine. Everything was no longer fine. She turned the notice face up again and read it a third time, looking for the specific language around legal standing. She had learned to read contracts from necessity, the same way she had learned to do most things, because there was no one else to do it for her. What she found was a lot of careful language designed to sound definitive while resting on a foundation that she suspected was shakier than it appeared. But she was not a lawyer, and suspicion was not the same as certainty, and 30 days was not very much time. She thought about who she could talk to. She thought about Elias Ward, which surprised her because he was a rancher, not a lawyer, and she had no particular reason to connect him to this problem except that he was the first person who came to mind when she thought about someone who might be honest with her. She pushed the thought aside. It felt too much like reaching for something she hadn't earned the right to reach for. She pulled it back out the following Friday, not because she had planned to tell him, but because Elias arrived at his usual time, and when he walked in, Lillian was sitting behind the counter with the Briggs notice and 3 other papers spread in front of her, and she had been staring at them for long enough that she'd stopped seeing the words. He stopped when he saw her face. "Trouble," he said. Not a question. "Building trouble," she said. She said it the way you admit something to a person you hadn't intended to admit it to. Quickly, before the sensible part of your brain catches up. He came to the counter. He looked at the papers without touching them. "Harlan Briggs," he said. His voice was flat. "You know him." "I know of him. He tried to buy the Moreno grazing land last spring, claimed there was a title defect going back 20 years. There wasn't." He paused. "He finds the cracks. Then he makes them bigger." "That's what he's doing here," Lillian said. "I don't have a written lease. Mr. Tatum and I had an arrangement. Mr. Tatum is dead and Briggs bought the building in September, and now he says the arrangement isn't valid." Elias was quiet for a moment, looking at the papers. "What does he want?" "Triple the rent, or I leave in 30 days. He looked up at her. "Can you pay triple?" "No," she said, simply, without embarrassment. "Do you have any paperwork at all? Receipts, letters, anything from Tatum that establishes the relationship?" Lillian thought about this. "I have receipts. Every month I paid, I have a receipt because I kept them. Mr. Tatum signed them." "Where are they?" "Upstairs, in a box with my mother's things." "Get them," he said. "All of them. 3 years of signed receipts from the previous owner establishing a consistent rental arrangement constitutes a pattern of practice. That might not be an iron wall against Briggs, but it's not nothing. You need a lawyer to look at it, but it's not nothing." She stared at him for a moment. "How do you know that?" He shrugged, a small movement. "Spent some time on the wrong end of a land dispute when I first came to Wyoming. Learned to read things carefully after that." She nodded slowly. Then she said, "Thank you." He picked up his bouquet. He was almost to the door when she spoke again. "Elias." He turned. "If I lose the shop—" She stopped herself. "Never mind." Say it," he said. She pressed her lips together, then said it anyway. "If I lose the shop, I lose the only thing I've been able to hold on to since my mother died. It's not just a business. I know that sounds—" "It doesn't sound like anything," he said. "It sounds like the truth." He looked at her for a moment with that direct, undeflected quality. "Don't give up the fight before you've actually started fighting," he said. "That's not a character trait. It's just a bad habit." Then he left. Lillian sat with that for a while. It was not the most comforting thing anyone had ever said to her. It was, she decided, considerably more useful. She found the receipts that evening. All of them, 67 signed receipts in her mother's wooden box, going back to the first month after her mother passed, each one with Mr. Tatum's signature in his careful, slightly arthritic hand. She laid them out on her kitchen table and counted them. 3 times she counted, because the number seemed important. 67 Fridays. 67 months of proof that this arrangement existed and that it had been honored from both sides. She sat back in her chair and thought about what to do next. The lawyer in Millfield was a man named Horace Pell, who had represented Harlan Briggs on at least 2 prior occasions that she knew of, which made him an unlikely ally. The nearest alternative was 30 miles east in Carpenter's Crossing, a man named Abernathy, who she'd heard was competent but expensive. She did not currently have expensive in her budget. She also had 28 days remaining. She thought about the letter she had been sitting on for 4 months. The letter to Garrison Supply Company in Denver, who had sent her an inquiry about a wholesale partnership that would allow her to expand her inventory and potentially supply other small shops through a regional arrangement. She had drafted a response 3 times and never sent it, because each time she got close, she thought about all the ways it could fall apart, and the fear of that felt larger than the potential of the thing itself. The letter was still on her desk upstairs. Everything felt connected in a way that was uncomfortable. The shop she might lose, the partnership she was afraid to pursue, the 67 receipts that proved she had been here all along, the man who had been bringing flowers to a grave for 3 years and still kept showing up. She went upstairs and looked at the unsent letter. She did not send it that night, but she didn't throw it away either, so. The next morning, a Thursday, she went to see Dorothy Meacham. Dorothy was 61 years old and had lived in Millfield since before most of the current buildings existed. She knew everything about everyone in a way that was not gossip, but simply the accumulated knowledge of a woman who had been paying attention for decades. She had also been a close friend of Elias Ward's. Lillian had always had a cordial relationship with Dorothy. The older woman bought flowers regularly and sometimes stayed to talk, but she had never specifically sought her out for information. She found Dorothy in her garden pulling dead growth from a rose bush that had finished the season. "Lillian Harper," Dorothy said without turning around, "you look like you've come to ask me something." "Harlan Briggs has put a notice on my building," Lillian said. Dorothy turned around then. Her expression settled into something resolute. "Sit down," she said, gesturing toward 2 wooden chairs on the porch. "Tell me exactly what the notice says." Lillian told her. Dorothy listened without interrupting, which was one of the things Lillian respected about her. When Lillian finished, Dorothy was quiet for a moment. "Briggs has been working toward this for a while," Dorothy said. "He bought the Tatum building because it was the easiest to acquire. Tatum's family didn't care about the property, they just wanted the cash. And you're the only tenant with no paper. He knows that." Elias Ward suggested the receipts might help. Dorothy looked at her. "When did you speak to Elias Ward about this?" "He comes into the shop every Friday." "I know he does," Dorothy said, in a tone that suggested she had been aware of this and had opinions about it that she was choosing not to voice just yet. "He mentioned the receipts?" "He said a consistent pattern of payment established by signed documentation might carry some legal weight. He's not wrong. You'd need Abernathy and Carpenter's Crossing to file the right paperwork, but it's a defensible position." She paused. "Has Elias offered to help?" "He told me not to give up the fight before I'd started it." Dorothy smiled. "The genuine kind, not polite." "That sounds like him." She paused again, longer this time. "That man has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time. It's good that he's talking to someone." "He doesn't say much." "He says enough. For Elias Ward, saying anything at all is considerable progress." Lillian looked at the dead rose stalks Dorothy had pulled from the bush. "She grew lavender," Lillian said. "Amelia, inside because the wind out here was too much for it outside." Dorothy looked at her carefully. "He told you that?" "He did." Dorothy nodded slowly, as if a piece of something had settled into a place she'd been waiting for it to go. "Lavender was Amelia's cure for everything," Dorothy said. "Headaches, bad nights, worry. She'd put a sprig of it under her pillow and say, 'It was better than any medicine.'" Her expression shifted into something softer and more painful. "She was a remarkable woman. She would not have wanted Elias to stay stopped." Lillian didn't say anything. "He comes every Friday," Dorothy said, not as a question. "Every Friday, 3 years." "Yes," Dorothy said, "he would." She looked out at the road. Some people grieve loudly. Elias has always been quiet about everything, including the things that hurt the most. That's not strength. It's just his way. Lillian nodded. She stood to go. Lillian, Dorothy said, fight Briggs. Use the receipts. Go see Abernathy. And, she paused, ask Elias Ward to go with you. Not because you need someone to hold your hand, because he knows that road better than you do, and because some things are easier to do when someone who respects you is sitting next to you while you do them. It was the most direct advice anyone had given her in a long time. She thought about it the whole way home. Friday came. Elias arrived at his usual time. Lillian had his bouquet ready, asters, clover, lavender, and she set it on the counter with the 67 receipts stacked neatly beside it. He looked at the receipts. Then he looked at her. I counted them, she said. 67. That's substantial. I need to go to Carpenter's Crossing to see Abernathy. He's the only lawyer I trust not to have Briggs's fingerprints on him. She stopped. Then she said, I'd like company on the road if you're willing. The question was out in the open. She watched him receive it. He looked at her for a long moment. When? He said. Monday. He nodded once. I'll bring the wagon, he said. The road's rough past the Henderson cutoff, and your mare doesn't handle ruts well. She blinked. How do you know how my mare handles ruts? I've watched you take that corner every market day for 2 years, he said. She drifts left when the road surface changes. You overcorrect. He picked up the bouquet. I'll come by at 6. He was almost to the door. Elias, she said. He stopped. Thank you, she said. For all of it. The receipt suggestion, coming Monday. All of it. He was quiet for a moment. He didn't turn around right away. Then he said, over his shoulder, a woman who's built something worth fighting for should have someone in her corner while she fights it. He went out. The bell above the door swung and was still. Lillian stood at her counter with 27 days remaining on Briggs's notice and 67 receipts in a neat stack and a wagon coming Monday at 6 in the morning. She felt something she hadn't felt in months, not certainty. Certainty was too clean for the situation she was in, something rawer than that, something that felt, against all reasonable expectation, like the beginning of a thing rather than the end of one. She put the receipts back in her mother's box and went to the desk where the unsent letter to Garrison Supply in Denver had been sitting for 4 months. She read it again. She picked up her pen. She did not send it that night, but she held the pen for a long time, and when she finally set it down, she set it down much closer to the paper than it had been before, the wagon. Elias, brought on Monday morning, was older than she expected, and better maintained than she expected, which told her something about him that she filed away without comment. He arrived at 6 exactly, not 5 minutes before and not 2 minutes after, and he didn't knock on her door but waited at the bottom of the exterior stairs that led up to her apartment above the shop. She came down at 6:05, still pulling her second glove on, and he didn't say anything about the 5 minutes. He just took the small case she was carrying, receipts, letter from Briggs, a few other papers she'd organized the night before, and set it in the wagon bed without being asked. Coffee, she said, holding out a covered tin cup. He took it. Thank you. That was the whole conversation for the first 20 minutes of the road. She had expected it to be uncomfortable, the silence, because silence with most people accumulated tension the way a room accumulates heat in summer. But Elias's silence had a different quality. It was the silence of a man who was simply present without needing to perform presence, and after a while Lillian stopped waiting for it to become awkward and just let it be what it was. The road to Carpenter's Crossing ran northeast, flat for the first 8 miles, and then beginning a gradual rise through scrubland where the grass came in pale and sparse between rocks. The Henderson cutoff Elias had mentioned was a junction where the main road branched, the left fork going to the mining camps, and the right continuing toward Carpenter's Crossing, and the surface there was badly rutted from heavy wagon traffic. He navigated it without drama. She noticed he slowed before the worst section and held the reins with a small adjustment of angle that kept them from catching the deep ruts on the right side. You do that automatically, she said. Do what? Correct for the road before you hit the bad part. He thought about this. You learn a road by traveling it enough times. How many times have you been to Carpenter's Crossing? Enough. He paused. I had business with Abernathy once, about 4 years ago. A grazing rights dispute with a neighbor who turned out not to be as neighborly as advertised. Did you win? We reached an arrangement that both parties could live with. Whether that's winning depends on what you wanted going in. She looked at him. What did you want going in? He was quiet for a moment. I wanted the neighbor to acknowledge he'd been dishonest. He never did that. But I kept the grazing rights, and he kept his pride. And we haven't had trouble since. He glanced at her briefly. What do you want from today? She thought about it honestly. I want Abernathy to tell me the receipts are enough, that I have legal standing to fight Briggs's notice. I want to know I'm not going to lose my mother's shop over a technicality that some man manufactured because he could. That's what you want, Elias said. What are you willing to accept if that's not what you get? It was a harder question, and she could tell he knew it. I don't know yet, she said. That's an honest answer. I'm usually honest. It doesn't always help. It helps more than the alternative, he said. I've known men who talked themselves into believing things that weren't true because the truth was harder to sit with. It always costs more in the end. She turned that over in her mind for a while. The road smoothed out past the cutoff, and the scrub gave way to longer grass where the ground began to hold more moisture coming down from the hills. Did you do that? She asked. After Amelia died. Talk yourself into believing things. She almost regretted the question the moment it was out. It was too direct for a 30-mile wagon ride with someone she had spoken to properly for only 2 weeks. But Elias didn't stiffen or pull back. Yes, he said. He said it simply, without drama, like acknowledging a weather fact. What did you tell yourself? He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. I told myself the grief would stay the same size forever, he said. That it would never get smaller, and that was right, because it not getting smaller meant I wasn't forgetting her. He kept his eyes on the road. That's not how grief actually works. It gets different, not smaller. But I convinced myself that anything different meant something was being lost. So I held it exactly the same size as long as I could manage. How long did you manage? I'm still managing it, he said. Some weeks better than others. She nodded. She did not offer a counterargument or a consolation, because he hadn't asked for either, and they would have been hollow anyway. The lavender, she said after a while. Does it make it harder or easier, having it in the bouquet? He thought about it. Both, he said, but the harder kind of easier, if that makes any sense. It makes sense, she said. They rode the rest of the way into Carpenter's Crossing mostly without talking, but the silence had changed quality again. It was the silence of two people who had said something real and were allowing it to settle. Carpenter's Crossing was twice the size of Millfield, with a main street long enough to have 4 blocks worth of storefronts and a train depot at the south end that brought in regular commercial traffic. Abernathy's office was on the second floor of a brick building midway down the main street, identified by a painted wooden sign that had weathered to the point where the first letter of his name had nearly disappeared. Elias pulled the wagon to a stop in front and set the brake. Do you want me to come in? He asked. Dorothy Meacham said I should ask you to. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, but a kind of acknowledgement. Did she? She did. Dorothy Meacham has been arranging things to her satisfaction since approximately 1851 and shows no signs of stopping, he said, but she's usually right. Then come in, Lillian said. Abernathy turned out to be a compact man in his 50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the particular alertness of someone who had spent decades paying close attention to the way words were arranged. He shook Lillian's hand, then Elias's, and didn't make anything of the fact that they had arrived together. She laid out the situation and the papers on his desk. He read the Briggs notice without touching it, just leaning forward with his glasses still on his forehead. Then he looked at the receipts. He picked those up and looked at them properly, one at a time, not all 67 but enough to establish the pattern. These are signed by Tatum himself, he said. Every one of them. You have 67. Yes. From the month after my mother passed to the month he died. Abernathy set the receipts down and leaned back. He looked at the Briggs notice again. The notice rests on the argument that your tenancy had no documented legal basis, he said. It doesn't say verbal agreements are invalid. It says yours isn't binding. There's a distinction. He paused. These receipts don't establish a written lease, but they establish a consistent documented pattern of payment accepted by the previous owner. That's a recognized tenancy arrangement in Wyoming territory. Briggs's attorneys know this, which is why the notice language is careful about what it claims rather than what it doesn't. Can he force me out? Lillian asked. He can try. Whether he succeeds depends on whether you fight and how you fight. Abernathy looked at the papers again. My advice is to file a formal response to the notice citing established tenancy on the basis of documented payment history and demand that any termination of the tenancy follow proper eviction procedures, which require notice and a court process that would take months. He paused. That doesn't solve your problem permanently. It gives you time and makes Briggs work harder for what he wants. How much time? 3 to 5 months if he decides to contest it. More if he decides it's not worth the effort. Abernathy looked at her steadily. Harlan Briggs is not accustomed to tenants who fight back. His model depends on people taking the first notice and leaving. He doesn't want a legal process. He wants you to go quietly. Then I won't go quietly, Lillian said. Elias, who had sat without speaking through all of this, made a small sound that might have been agreement. Abernathy looked at him. You have something to add, Ward? Briggs did the same thing to the Moreno family last spring, Elias said. Manufactured a title defect. When they pushed back with documentation, he dropped it within 6 weeks. He calculates the cost of the fight against the value of the prize. If the fight costs more than the prize is worth, he moves on. Your shop, Abernathy said to Lillian. What's the monthly rent you were paying Tatum? She told him. He made a brief calculation in his head. The building's value to Briggs at triple rent is substantial over time, but his legal cost to force a contested eviction against a documented tenancy would eat significantly into the first 2 years of that gain. He paused. If he thinks you'll fold, it's worth it. If you show him you won't, the arithmetic changes. Then show him, Elias said. Not to Abernathy, to Lillian. She felt the weight of the word, not as pressure, but as something more like permission. File the response, she told Abernathy, whatever it costs. He named a figure. It was not small, but it was survivable. I'll need half now, he said. She had brought exactly enough for this possibility, which told her more about her own instincts than she had been crediting herself for. She counted it out on his desk. Abernathy took the money and began writing. He asked her questions about the receipts, about the specific dates, about whether she had any written correspondence with Tatum at all. She had one letter from him from the previous spring about a water leak in the back wall that he had offered to repair, which she had kept without knowing it would matter. She told him about it. Bring that letter when you come back Thursday, he said. Anything that puts Tatum's name and your address in the same document is useful. She said she would. When they walked out of Abernathy's office back to the wagon, the morning was fully established, the sun past the midpoint of its climb, and Lillian stood on the sidewalk for a moment, with the strange light feeling that comes after making a decision that has been sitting in you as dread for a long time. The decision itself wasn't the relief. The action was. Thank you, she said to Elias. I didn't do much. You came, she said. That's not nothing. He looked at her for a moment, then he said, You did that yourself. I just drove the wagon. You told me the receipts mattered, before I knew they mattered. He was quiet. He didn't argue with her, but he didn't take credit either. He just went around to the horse and checked the rigging in a way that looked like a man who needed something practical to do with his hands. Are you hungry? He said, not turning around. There's a decent place on the south end of the street. I've eaten there before. She was in fact very hungry. She had been too anxious that morning to eat before they left. Yes, she said. They ate at a small table by the window of a place that served beans and cornbread and coffee that was stronger than it needed to be. Elias ate with the focused efficiency of a man who ate meals as necessary fuel rather than experience, and she found herself watching him the way you watch someone when you're trying to understand them better and not doing it obviously enough to be caught. She was not as subtle as she thought. You're trying to figure something out, he said, not looking up from his plate. I'm trying to understand what kind of man spends 3 years bringing wildflowers to a hill, she said. He set down his fork. He looked at her directly. The faithful kind, he said. Or the stubborn kind, depending on how you look at it. Which do you think you are? Probably both. They're not always different things. She nodded. She ate a piece of cornbread and thought about that. Dorothy said Amelia would not have wanted you to stay stopped, Lillian said. She said it carefully, watching his face to see if she had gone somewhere she shouldn't. His face didn't close, but something moved through it. Not pain exactly, more like the recognition of something he had been carrying at a specific angle for so long that being asked to look at it directly required a small adjustment. "Dorothy says a lot of things," he said. "She's usually right. You said so yourself." He picked up his fork again. He took a few bites. She waited. "Amelia was practical," he said. "That's one of the things I loved most about her. She didn't believe in waste. She thought energy spent on things that couldn't be changed was energy stolen from things that could be." He paused. "She would have told me I was being wasteful. Staying stopped. But you've kept going to the hill. That's not the same as staying stopped. That's remembering. There's a difference." He looked at her. "I can remember her without living in the place the grief happened. He stopped. He pressed his lips together for a moment. "I haven't figured out how to do that yet. The separating, the two things existing at the same time without one canceling the other. It was the most he had said about it at once. Lillian could see the effort it had cost him, and the fact that he had not entirely intended to say that much. "Maybe they don't have to be separated," she said carefully. "Maybe they can both just be there." He looked at her. "I don't know how to do that either," he said. "Neither do I," she said. "I'm still figuring out how to remember my mother without flinching every time something in the shop reminds me of her." She paused. "She planted the lavender, actually, the plant I keep on the back counter. I kept it because she kept it, not because I particularly knew what to do with it." Something in his face changed, not dramatically, but it changed. "The lavender you add to my bouquets," he said. "Same plant," she said. "I dry it and use what I can." He was quiet for a long moment. "Her lavender," he said slowly, "in Amelia's bouquet. If that's strange, I can—" "No," he said. "It's not strange." He looked at his plate. Then he looked back at her. "It's the opposite of strange. I just need a moment with it." She gave him the moment. Outside the window, a boy chased a dog down the street with the joyful pointlessness of childhood. Two women walked past talking, their voices muffled through the glass. "My mother would have liked Amelia," Lillian said. "From what you've described, the lavender on the windowsill, the practical view of things." "Amelia would have liked anyone who grew lavender and kept it carefully," Elias said. His voice was different now, quieter, but not in the closed-off way, in the open way. "She would have come into your shop and stayed an hour and left knowing everything about you." "She sounds exhausting," Lillian said. Elias laughed. It was brief and surprised and unguarded, and it changed his whole face. "She was, sometimes," he said. And the honest admission in it, the way he said it, not performing grief, not sanitizing her into something perfect, landed in Lillian's chest like something important. The love of someone who remembered a real person, not a monument. "Tell me something true about her," Lillian said. "Not the kind thing, a real thing." He looked at her steadily. "She snored," he said. "Considerably. I am a light sleeper, and she was not. And for the first 2 years of our marriage, I was perpetually tired, and she thought it was the ranch work." He paused. "She also cried at things she found beautiful instead of sad. A hawk circling in good light. A particularly fine piece of craftsmanship. She cried at those things and stayed dry-eyed through the hard winters, and I never entirely understood that about her." Lillian smiled. "What did she do when she cried at beautiful things?" she asked. "Acted like she hadn't," he said. Turned her face slightly away and blinked fast. She didn't like being caught doing it. His mouth softened. "I let her think she was getting away with it." Lillian held that image. "She sounds like someone worth keeping," she said. "She was," he said. Quietly, without any further weight added to it. They finished eating. He paid before she could, which she noted but didn't fight because it would have been a different kind of fight than the Briggs situation, and she only had so much energy for conflict in a single day. The ride home was longer in the way return journeys always feel longer, not because of distance, but because the anticipation that carries you out is gone, and the road is just road. She told him about her mother. Not the death or the grief, but the woman. The way she had run the shop with an almost aggressive cheerfulness that Lillian had found maddening as a teenager and now understood as a survival mechanism. The way she had named every significant plant in the shop, not with proper botanical names, but with the names from books she had read. So there was a pot called Rochester and a climbing vine called Linton, and a particularly stubborn fern called Earnshaw that refused to die no matter how poorly it was treated. Elias listened the way he did everything, without filling the space, without rushing her toward a point. "Earnshaw is still in the shop?" he said when she finished. "Back corner, past the counter." "I've seen it," he said. "I thought it looked belligerent." She laughed out loud. It startled her slightly, the strength of it. He glanced at her with something that wasn't quite a smile, but lived in the same neighborhood. "I've been coming into that shop for 3 years," he said. "I noticed the fern." "You never looked like you noticed anything." "I notice things," he said. "I just don't announce it." She thought about this, about what else he might have noticed in 3 years of Friday visits, about what she might have noticed about him without acknowledging it. "Why did you tell me?" she said. "That day, when I asked who the flowers were for. You could have said nothing. You could have just paid and left." He considered this. "You asked directly," he said. "I'm not in the habit of lying to direct questions." "But you'd been coming in for 3 years without saying anything." "You'd been not asking for 3 years," he said. "That was your business. But once you asked," he shrugged, "you'd earned the answer." "Earned it." She turned that word over. "What did I do to earn it?" "You added the lavender," he said, "without asking me, without explaining. You just—" He paused. "You paid attention, and then you acted on what you noticed. That's rare." He kept his eyes on the road. "And you didn't treat the grief like something to tiptoe around. You put lavender in the bouquet like it belonged there, like her memory was something normal to acknowledge rather than something fragile to be careful of." She was quiet for a long moment. "It does belong there," she said. "I know that now," he said. "I needed someone else to act like it was true first." That sentence stayed with her the rest of the way to Millfield. It was still with her when he pulled the wagon up to her shop and handed down her case of papers and said he'd be by Friday as usual. She went upstairs and stood in her apartment for a while without doing anything productive. Then she went to her desk and looked at the unsent letter to Garrison Supply in Denver. She picked up her pen. She read the draft all the way through. She changed 2 sentences that felt wrong and fixed a third that was unclear. Then she folded it, addressed it, and set it by the door to take to the post office in the morning. She didn't know if they would say yes. She didn't know if the Briggs situation would resolve itself or drag into something ugly. She didn't know if any of the things she was trying to hold were actually holdable. What she knew was that she had gone to Carpenter's Crossing and paid Abernathy and filed a response and come home. And tomorrow she would send the letter, and on Friday, Elias Ward would come in at his usual time, and she would have his bouquet ready with the asters and the clover and the lavender that had started in her mother's hands and now went weakly up a hill to a woman she had never met. Both of them remembered someone. Both of them were figuring out how to do that without letting it be the only thing. She thought about what he had said, that he needed someone to act like it was true first. She went to the back counter where Earnshaw the belligerent fern sat in its pot, still alive out of sheer stubbornness, and she touched one of its fronds lightly. "You would have liked him," she said, to the fern, to the shop, to whatever remained of her mother in the space where her mother had spent a working life. "He's careful with things. He pays attention." She paused. "He lets people think they're getting away with things when they're not." Earnshaw did not respond, which was appropriate. Lillian got ready for bed. On Wednesday, Abernathy sent a messenger with a copy of the formal response he had filed to Briggs's notice. The language was precise and deliberate, and left very little room for misinterpretation. She read it twice and felt something firm up in her chest that had been soft with worry for weeks. On Thursday, she took the Tatum letter to Carpenter's Crossing on her own mare, who did indeed drift left on the Henderson cutoff in a way that she corrected with an overcorrection, and she noted this with a combination of amusement and irritation. Abernathy took the letter and added it to the file. "This strengthens the position considerably," he said. "A property repair communication from the owner directly to your address establishes his recognition of you as a tenant in a documented form." He looked at her steadily. "Briggs will see this when his attorneys review our response. My estimate is we'll hear something from his side within 3 weeks. What will we hear? Either he'll push back with a counterfiling, which means he intends to fight, or he'll go quiet, which means he's recalculating." He paused. "Ward's read of his character, that he prefers easy wins, is consistent with what I know of his reputation. If he goes quiet, It may mean you've cost him more than the prize is worth. She rode home in the thin afternoon light with the feeling of someone who had done everything they could do for now and had to live in the space between action and result, which was always the hardest space. Friday came the same as it always did. At 2:10, the bell above her door rang. Elias Ward came in with his collar turned up, and she had his bouquet already on the counter, asters and clover and lavender, the same as always. He picked it up and held it the same way he always held it. Abernathy filed the response, she said. Good, he said. He thinks Briggs might back down. He might, Elias said. Or he might not. Either way, you'll handle it. She looked at him. How do you know that? He looked at her steadily over the bouquet. Because you went to Carpenter's Crossing when you were afraid to, he said. Because you sent the letter to Denver when you'd been afraid to for 4 months. He paused. How did you know that? She blinked. I didn't tell you about the Denver letter. You didn't have to, he said. You had a draft on your desk the day I first saw you with the Briggs papers. You looked at it the same way you looked at those receipts, like something you needed to deal with but couldn't make yourself start. He held her gaze. Did you send it? She stared at him. You notice things, she said. I told you that, he said. She shook her head slowly. Then, despite herself, she smiled. Yes, she said. I sent it. Wednesday morning. Something settled in his expression, satisfaction maybe, but the quiet kind. Good, he said. He picked up his bouquet and turned toward the door. Elias, she said. He stopped. She would have liked you, Lillian said. My mother. She would have liked you very much. He was still for a moment. His back was to her. Then he said quietly, That means something. He went out. The bell stopped swinging. Lillian stood at her counter in the late Friday afternoon with Earnshaw sulking in the corner and 23 days left on Briggs's notice and a letter to Denver somewhere on the road and the smell of lavender still in the air. She pressed her palms flat on the counter and thought that some things moved slower than fear wanted them to and faster than grief knew how to allow, and that somehow both of those things were happening at the same time, and that she was improbably still standing in the middle of it. The letter from Garrison Supply arrived on a Tuesday, 11 days after Lillian had sent hers. She almost missed it because it came tucked between 2 supply invoices and a notice about road conditions north of Millfield that the postmaster had included out of what she could only assume was a compulsive sense of thoroughness. She was sorting through the stack at the counter before opening and saw the Denver postmark and the formal Garrison letterhead and set everything else down. She read it standing up, which was how she read things she was nervous about, as if sitting would make her less prepared to absorb bad news. It was not bad news. Garrison Supply Company was interested in discussing a partnership arrangement. They had received inquiries from 3 other small shops in the Wyoming Territory and believed a regional wholesale relationship could be mutually beneficial. They were proposing a meeting. Either she could come to Denver at her convenience, or their regional representative, a man named Carroll, would be passing through the territory in approximately 6 weeks and could stop in Millfield if that was preferable. 6 weeks. She set the letter down on the counter and stood with her hands flat on either side of it, looking at it. 6 weeks put the Garrison meeting in the middle of whatever was still unresolved with Briggs. It put it squarely in the territory of uncertainty, which was where everything currently lived. She had not heard from Briggs's attorneys since Abernathy filed the formal response 2 weeks ago, and the silence was the kind that could mean either retreat or preparation, and she could not tell which. She was not going to let that uncertainty make her decision for her. She had already decided that, more or less, but deciding it in principle and executing it in practice were different animals. She wrote back to Garrison that afternoon and confirmed Millfield, 6 weeks, whenever Mr. Carroll's schedule allowed. Then she went back to work because there was always work to go back to, and work was the thing that kept the anxiety from occupying every available surface of her mind. It was Wednesday, 2 days until Friday. She was surprised to find herself counting. She told Elias about the Garrison letter that Friday, not as a planned disclosure, but because he came in and she had his bouquet ready, and he looked at her face and said, "Something happened," and she just told him. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting. "That's what you wanted," he said when she finished. "It's the beginning of what I wanted," she said. "A meeting isn't a contract." No, but a meeting means they read your letter and thought it was worth responding to. He picked up his bouquet. You wrote it, they read it, they said yes to a conversation. That's how most things start. What if Carol comes and the Briggs situation is still unresolved? What does that look like to a business partner, a shop owner in the middle of a lease dispute? It looks like a shop owner who fought back instead of leaving, he said. That's not a liability. That's a character reference. She looked at him for a moment. You make things sound simpler than they are, she said. I make them sound as simple as they actually are, he said. You make them more complicated because you're afraid of what happens if you let them be straightforward. It landed harder than she was prepared for. Not because it was cruel, as there was nothing cruel in the delivery, but because it was exactly right, and she knew it, and she wasn't used to being known that accurately by someone she'd only been talking to properly for a month. That's a very direct observation, she said. You've told me you appreciate directness. I said I'm usually honest. That's different from saying I always appreciate having the favor returned. The corner of his mouth moved. Noted. He was heading for the door when she said, Will you come up to the hill with me? He stopped. She had not planned to ask that either. It came from the same place the other things came from, the place that operated faster than her better judgment. I've been thinking about it, she said when he didn't respond immediately. You've been going up there for 3 years, and I've been making those bouquets for 3 years, and I just thought. She stopped. She was doing the complicated thing again. You don't have to. When? He said. Now. If you're not needed back at the ranch. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the bouquet in his hands. I've never taken anyone up there, he said. His voice was level, but she could hear what was underneath it. Not refusal, but the weight of what the invitation meant. I know, she said. You don't have to. He looked at her. Come on then, he said. The hill was a 20-minute ride east of Millfield, rising gradually through the flat land before lifting more steeply at the end, in a way that required the horses to pick their path carefully among loose shale. She followed Elias because he knew the way, and she didn't, and she noticed he did not go fast. He let the horse set its own pace, and she matched him. At the top, the land opened out. She understood immediately why Amelia had loved it. From the top of that hill you could see the valley spread below in 3 directions, and to the west the mountain line was clear and specific against the sky, and the light came differently up here than it did in town, wider somehow, less interrupted. The wind moved through the grass in long waves. There was a flat stone at the highest point, and in front of it, a small wooden marker that was weathered but still solid, the name carved clearly, Amelia Ward, and below it a date. Elias crouched and set the bouquet against the base of the marker. He did it with the same deliberate care she had watched through the shop window for 3 years, and seeing it here, in context, changed it. She understood now that it was not ceremony and it was not performance. It was just a man setting flowers down where they were supposed to go. He stayed crouched for a moment with his hand resting on the stone. Lillian stood a few paces back. She hadn't brought anything, which she now felt slightly foolish about, and then felt foolish for feeling foolish. Elias stood. They were both quiet for a while, looking at the valley. She found this spot the first spring we were here, he said. We'd been on the ranch 8 months, and she'd been learning the land, walking it in sections the way she did everything, methodically, covering ground. She came home one afternoon and said she'd found the best view in Wyoming, and that when she died, she wanted to be buried where she could see it. She said that? When she died? Amelia talked about death the way most people talk about weather. Not morbidly, just factually. It was going to happen, and she preferred to think about it clearly rather than be surprised. He paused. She was 31 years old when she said it. I thought she was being dramatic. She wasn't. She never was, he said. She was the least dramatic person I've ever known. Lillian looked at the marker, at the dates. She did the arithmetic without intending to. She was 34, Lillian said. Yes. And the baby? 4 days, he said. The baby lived 4 days. He said it without elaboration, without reaching for language to make it larger or smaller than it was. A boy. I called him James because Amelia wanted a James, and she wasn't conscious enough at the end to choose. Lillian pressed her lips together. She did not say she was sorry, because she had already said that and it had been true then, and saying it again felt like reaching for the same inadequate tool because she didn't have a better one. Did she know? Lillian asked. About the baby? That he didn't… I don't know, he said. I hope not, but I genuinely don't know. The wind moved through the grass. Somewhere below the hill, a hawk was working a thermal, circling with its wings set. You said she cried at beautiful things, Lillian said. Yes. She would have cried at this view. Elias looked out at the valley. Every time, he said. Every single time, and she'd turn her face slightly to the side and blink fast and think I didn't see. There was a long quiet. I miss her differently up here than I do anywhere else, he said. It came out like something he had thought before but never said aloud. Everywhere else I miss the absence, the chair where she sat, the things she would have said. Here, he stopped. Here I just miss her, the actual person. It's cleaner somehow, worse and cleaner at the same time. Lillian thought about the shop, about the lavender plant that had been her mother's, the fern named Earnshaw, the small habits that were really just her mother's habits continuing through her hands. I know what you mean, she said, about worse and cleaner at the same time. He looked at her. Your mother. The shop is full of her absence, but some nights I just… She stopped. Some nights I just miss her without any of the rest of it, without the shop or the things or the memories, just the person. Yes, he said, that's exactly it. They stood on that hill in the October wind, two people missing their dead, and it was not comfortable exactly, but it was honest. And honest was its own kind of comfort when you stopped expecting comfort to feel pleasant. After a while, Elias said, Thank you for coming up here. She looked at him. Thank you for bringing me, she said. They came down off the hill in the early afternoon, and Elias rode back to his ranch and Lillian returned to the shop, and the day continued with the business-like indifference days, half to what has happened inside them. She restocked the front display and repotted a cutting that had been waiting too long and wrote 3 letters to suppliers, and did not let herself think too hard about the hill or the marker or the way Elias had looked when he said he didn't know if Amelia had known about the baby. She let herself think about it later, at night, when there was nothing left to do. She thought about the way grief had arranged itself differently in him than it had in her. His more contained, more settled into specific ritual, hers more scattered through ordinary objects. She thought about what Dorothy had said, that Amelia would not have wanted him to stay stopped. And she thought about what staying stopped actually looked like when you were watching it from the outside. The same flowers, the same road, the same careful way of holding things. And then she thought about how it had looked on the hill, how it hadn't looked like staying stopped at all. It had looked like someone maintaining a relationship with something he couldn't keep, because that was the only relationship available, and there was nothing pathetic or paralyzed about that. It was just a very specific kind of fidelity. She understood it better now than she had before. She also understood, in a way she hadn't fully allowed herself to, that she was looking forward to Friday in a way that was no longer primarily about bouquets and receipts and the legal situation with Harlan Briggs. She sat with that understanding for a while and did not rush to do anything with it. 12 days after Abernathy filed the response, she got a message from his office. She rode to Carpenter's Crossing that same afternoon. Abernathy was at his desk with 3 papers in front of him that he turned to face her when she sat down. Briggs's attorneys responded, he said. Not a counterfiling, a letter. He pushed the papers toward her. Read the 3rd paragraph. She found the 3rd paragraph. Briggs Land and Property Holdings was, the letter stated, willing to discuss a revised lease arrangement that reflected current market conditions while acknowledging the established relationship between the tenant and the previous owner. They proposed a meeting at mutual convenience to discuss terms. She read it twice. He blinked, she said. He blinked, Abernathy agreed. He's not withdrawing. He wants a negotiation. But requesting a negotiation instead of pushing forward with the notice means his attorneys have advised him that forcing a contested eviction against your documented tenancy is more expensive and uncertain than he originally calculated. He paused. He still wants more rent. He's just no longer confident he can take the building from you without significant legal cost. So what do I do? You negotiate, Abernathy said, from a position that is now considerably stronger than it was 3 weeks ago. He looked at her steadily. You will not get to stay at your current rate. That is not realistic. The building has changed hands, the new owner is entitled to market rate, and some increase was always going to happen. What you can negotiate is a reasonable increase rather than an extortionate one, and a proper written lease that protects your tenancy going forward. How much of an increase is reasonable? He named a figure. It was more than she paid now, but less than half of what Briggs had originally demanded. She could manage that figure. Not easily, but she could manage it. Set the meeting, she said. There's one more thing, Abernathy said. He picked up the third paper separately. Briggs will likely want the meeting on his terms, his office, his timeline, his atmosphere. I would suggest you counter-propose a neutral location. The courthouse anteroom is available for exactly this kind of arrangement. It changes the dynamic. Will he agree to the courthouse? He may object, but agreeing to it or not tells you something about his intentions. Abernathy looked at her over his reading glasses. A man who is genuinely interested in a fair negotiation doesn't care where it happens. A man who is still trying to intimidate you cares very much. She thought about Harlan Briggs in his polished boots, setting her bouquet down sideways. Propose the courthouse, she said. She told Elias about it on Friday. He listened the same way he always listened, without interrupting, without rushing her toward the conclusion. Abernathy thinks he blinked, she said. Abernathy's right, Elias said. Briggs went quiet for 2 weeks and then came back asking for a meeting. That's not a man who thinks he has a winning hand. That's a man recalculating the pot. I proposed the courthouse for the meeting location. Elias looked at her. Good instinct. It was Abernathy's instinct. You took the advice. That's the same thing. He paused. Has he responded to the location? Not yet. Abernathy expects to hear by Monday. Elias picked up his bouquet. He was quiet for a moment in the way that meant he was thinking through something. Lillian, he said. Yes. Whatever happens in that meeting, whether Briggs agrees to reasonable terms or tries to push further, you're going to have to hold your position in a room with him. That's different from filing paperwork through an attorney. That's being in the same room with someone who has been trying to take something from you. He looked at her. Are you ready for that? It was not a comfortable question. She appreciated that he asked it anyway. I don't know, she said honestly. I was ready to leave the first time he came in. I was almost ready to just sign whatever he put in front of me and figure out the money later. But you didn't. No. Why not? She thought about it. Because he set the bouquet down sideways, she said. He looked at her, waiting. When he came in that first morning, she said, he picked up one of the display bouquets and set it back down sideways, like it was worthless, like it didn't matter how it was sitting. She paused. I don't know why that was the thing that made me angry instead of scared, but it was. He didn't have to do that. He made his point already. The sideways bouquet was just cruelty for its own sake, small cruelty, the kind people do when they think you can't afford to respond. Elias was quiet. When you walk into that room with him, he said, remember the sideways bouquet. She looked at him. Not to make yourself angry, he said. To remind yourself what kind of man you're dealing with. Small cruelty is its own kind of information. She nodded slowly. Will you come? To the meeting? I'm not a lawyer. I know, but you've dealt with him before, or men like him, and you... She stopped. She was aware of what she was about to say and chose to say it anyway. You make me less afraid. Not because you do anything specific, just because you're there. It was the most direct thing she had said to him that wasn't about flowers or legal documents, and she watched him receive it. He went still for a moment in that way he had. The temperature dropped stillness. Abernathy will be there, he said. Yes. Then I'll come, he said. But Abernathy speaks for you on the legal questions. I'm there to carry the wagon. You're very committed to the wagon metaphor, she said. It's an accurate metaphor, he said. He left. She stood in the quiet shop and thought about what she'd said and what he'd said, and the fact that she had told Elias Ward, a man who'd come in to buy flowers every Friday for 3 years, that he made her less afraid, and he had said yes without making it into anything larger than it was. That was, she thought, a remarkable quality in a person. Briggs agreed to the courthouse. Abernathy sent word on Monday morning, and Lillian read the message standing at the counter the same way she read all the important things, as if her legs needed to be prepared for impact. The meeting was set for Thursday of the following week. She had 10 days, which felt simultaneously like too long and not enough. She told Dorothy Meacham on Tuesday because Dorothy had been following the situation with the focused attention of someone who had a personal stake in the outcome, even though strictly speaking she did not. Dorothy came into the shop to buy flowers for her table. She did this every week regardless of circumstances, and she stayed to hear the update. The courthouse location was the right move, Dorothy said. Briggs does his best work in spaces he controls. A neutral room under a judicial roof changes his arithmetic. Abernathy said something similar. Abernathy is a smart man. Dorothy picked up a stem of late-season asters and held it to the light, with the air of a woman judging something against an internal standard. Is Elias coming? Yes. Dorothy set the stem down and looked at Lillian with an expression that was trying not to be too obviously satisfied with itself and not entirely succeeding. Don't look at me like that, Lillian said. I'm not looking like anything, Dorothy said. You're looking like a woman who thinks she arranged something. I suggested you ask him to come to Carpenter's Crossing, Dorothy said. Whatever happened after that is entirely your own work. She paused. What did happen? We rode to Carpenter's Crossing. We ate dinner. We talked. Lillian organized some stems in a jar to give her hands something to do. He took me up to the hill. Dorothy went very still. Amelia's hill, Dorothy said. Yes. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. She looked at the flowers in front of her without seeing them. He has never taken anyone up there, Dorothy said. Not since she died. Not family, not neighbors, no one. She looked at Lillian steadily. That man does not do things without thinking them through. If he took you up to that hill, it was because he decided to, deliberately. I asked him to, Lillian said. I know you did. He still had to say yes. Dorothy picked up the asters again. Did he tell you about the baby? He told me. He doesn't talk about James, Dorothy said quietly. Not to anyone. Not to me, and Amelia was my closest friend for 14 years. She paused. He told you. Lillian didn't know what to do with that, so she did what she usually did with things she didn't know how to hold. She kept working. I'm afraid, Lillian said. Not about the meeting with Briggs. About something else, and they both knew it. Of what specifically, Dorothy said, that I'm reading something into this that's just about grief, his grief, that I'm someone convenient who happens to know about flowers and his wife liked flowers, and I'm filling a space that isn't really shaped like me. Dorothy looked at her for a long time. Lillian, she said, that man has been in this shop every Friday for 3 years. He has been in this specific town, walking past the other shops, eating meals alone in his kitchen, going to that hill alone. He has not been looking for someone to fill a space. She set the flowers down. He is not a man who reaches for convenient things. He is a man who is careful to the point of being difficult about everything he allows close to him. She paused. The question isn't whether you're the right shape. The question is what you want. Lillian stood in her flower shop with the lavender smell around her and her mother's fern in the corner, and 67 receipts in a box upstairs, and a meeting with Harlan Briggs on Thursday, and a letter from Garrison Supply sitting on her desk. I don't know yet, she said. I know I'm looking forward to Friday. I know that when I'm trying to do something hard, he's the first person I think of. That's not nothing, Dorothy said. No, Lillian agreed. It's not nothing. Dorothy bought her asters and 2 stems of goldenrod and a small bundle of dried lavender, and she left with the particular walk of a woman who was choosing not to say the last thing on her mind, which was its own kind of grace. Thursday came. The courthouse anteroom in Millfield was a plain space, 2 long tables, wooden chairs, a window that let in good light from the south. Abernathy was already there when Lillian arrived. Elias came 3 minutes after her, having ridden in from the ranch, and he took a seat to her right without ceremony. Harlan Briggs arrived with 2 men, his personal attorney, a slick-looking fellow named Desmond, and a second man who appeared to serve no function except to make Briggs's side of the table look more substantial. Briggs looked at Elias when he sat down. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, but a reassessment. Ward, he said. Not a greeting, an acknowledgement. Briggs, Elias said, in exactly the same tone. Then the conversation was done between them, and Abernathy took over. The negotiation lasted 2 hours. Lillian had been prepared for it to be unpleasant, and it was, but not in the loud, dramatic way she had been bracing for. It was unpleasant in the grinding, procedural way of two attorneys working through disagreements clause by clause, while the principals sat and watched and occasionally interjected. Desmond pushed hard on the rent increase. Abernathy pushed back with the documented tenancy and the cost of a contested legal proceeding. Briggs said very little. He watched Lillian with the calculating attention of a man who was trying to determine whether she would hold or give. She held. She thought about the sideways bouquet. She kept her face even and her hands still on the table, and she held. At the 90-minute mark, Desmond proposed a figure that was 60% above her current rate. Abernathy countered with 40. Briggs for the first time spoke directly. 50, he said. 5-year written lease, standard terms, renewable. Take it or leave it. Lillian looked at Abernathy. Abernathy gave her the smallest nod. This is the number. It's defensible. It's survivable. She looked at Briggs. 50%, she said. 5-year lease. And I want a clause guaranteeing right of first refusal if the property goes up for sale again. Desmond started to object. Briggs raised one hand and Desmond stopped. Briggs looked at her for a long moment with those calculating eyes. Fine, he said. He said it the way a man says something when he has decided the cost of continued argument is higher than the thing he'd lose by agreeing. Abernathy drafted the key terms by hand. They were initialed by both parties. The formal lease would be drawn up properly and signed within the week. When it was over and Briggs and his men had left, Abernathy shook Lillian's hand and said she had handled herself well, and he would send the full lease draft by Tuesday. She stood outside the courthouse in the afternoon light and felt the specific exhaustion of something large and frightening being over. Elias stood beside her. Right of first refusal, he said. That wasn't in anything we discussed. I thought of it in the room, she said. It felt like the thing that would make it mine, not just rented, but first in line. Did you think he'd agree? No, she said honestly. I thought he'd push back and we'd drop it and live with the 50%. But he didn't push back. Elias was quiet. Why do you think he agreed? She said. He thought about it. Because by that point he'd already decided you were going to cost him more than you were worth to fight, he said. The right of first refusal costs him nothing if he never sells. He probably doesn't intend to sell. It was an easy concession that let him leave the room feeling like he'd given something. So it was a negotiating gesture. On his end. On yours, it's a legal protection. He looked at her. Both things can be true. She nodded. She looked down the street at the ordinary afternoon life of Millfield going on around the courthouse, as if nothing significant had just happened. I need to go back to the shop, she said. I know. She looked at him. Thank you? Again. I sat in a chair, he said. You sat in that chair, she said. That's the whole thing. He walked her to her mare. He checked the rigging, which she let him do because she had stopped arguing with the habit. He made sure she was mounted before he went for his own horse. She rode back to the shop. She went inside. She stood in the middle of it. The smell of cut stems and dried lavender and damp soil, her mother's fern belligerent in the corner, 67 receipts in the box upstairs that had turned out to matter after all. And she let the whole of it settle into her. The shop was still hers. It was going to cost her more to keep it, and she would have to make that work. And the garrison meeting was in 3 weeks, and Carol from Denver was going to walk through this same door and see what she had built and decide whether it was worth his company's time and money. She went to her desk. The draft of the garrison response was there, confirmed and sent. Next to it, a new piece of paper. She sat down and began writing out the figures. What the shop made in an average month. What it made in a good month. What the new rent would take. What a garrison partnership might add. She wrote for an hour. The numbers were not comfortable, but they were not impossible. That was what she had, she decided. Not comfortable, but not impossible. It was more than she'd had 3 weeks ago. On the back counter, Earnshaw the belligerent fern sat in its pot, looking exactly as it always looked. Neither better nor worse, entirely unimpressed by everything that had happened and unaware that any of it had mattered. Lillian looked at it for a moment. We're staying, she told it. Earnshaw did not respond. Friday was 2 days away. The formal lease from Abernathy arrived on Tuesday as promised, and Lillian read every line of it twice before she signed. She was not the kind of person who signed things without reading them. She had learned that from her mother, who had learned it the hard way from a supplier who had buried an exclusivity clause in a contract that cost her 3 seasons of flexibility. The lesson had been passed down not as a warning, but as a habit. You read what you sign, all of it, even the parts that look like standard language, because standard language is where the surprises hide. The lease was clean. Abernathy had done his work carefully. The right of first refusal clause was there in the 3rd page, precise and unambiguous. She signed it, had Dorothy Meacham witness it, since Dorothy was already in the shop buying her weekly flowers and was, as she pointed out, a perfectly legitimate witness, and sent it back with Abernathy's messenger before noon. When it was done, she stood at her counter and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes of feeling like she had won something, and then she went back to work because Carol from Garrison Supply was arriving in 17 days, and there were things to prepare. The preparation was practical and absorbing, and she was grateful for both qualities. She inventoried everything she currently stocked, calculated her average weekly movement on each variety, identified the gaps, the things customers asked for that she couldn't consistently provide because her current suppliers were unreliable on volume or timing. She wrote all of this down in a ledger she'd bought specifically for the purpose, in columns that were clear and specific, because if Carol was going to come to Millfield and look at what she had built, she was going to show him she understood it. Dorothy came by on Thursday and found her at the back table with the ledger open and 3 years of her own records spread around her. "You look like you're preparing for a military campaign," Dorothy said. "I'm preparing for a business meeting," Lillian said. "It's not entirely different." Dorothy looked at the ledger. "Can I see?" Lillian turned it so Dorothy could read the columns. Dorothy was quiet for a while, working through the numbers with the attention of someone who had managed her own household accounts for 40 years and understood what the figures meant. "Your summer movement on lavender is underreported," Dorothy said finally. "What do you mean?" "You sell dried lavender bundles in June and July. I buy them. Margaret Finch buys them. The Hendersons buy them every year for their daughter's room. But you don't have a separate line for it. You folded it into the mixed dried category." Dorothy tapped the column. "If Carol looks at this, he won't see lavender as a standalone seller. He'll see it buried inside something broader." Lillian looked at the column. Dorothy was right. "I've been doing my own accounts the way that made sense to me," Lillian said. "Not the way that makes sense to someone looking from the outside." "Those are often different things," Dorothy said. "Let me sit with this for an hour." She pulled up a stool and Lillian let her, because Dorothy Meacham's practical intelligence was not a thing to argue with when it was being offered freely. They spent the morning going through the ledger together, Dorothy asking questions and Lillian answering them, and both of them discovering that the shape of the business looked different when you organized the information for someone else's eyes rather than your own. It was not that anything had been wrong before. It was that the story the numbers told depended on how you arranged them, and Lillian had been arranging them for her own memory, not for a stranger's first impression. "You've built something real here," Dorothy said at the end. She said it simply, as a fact. "This Carol will see that if you show it to him properly. He might still say no. He might, but he won't say no because the shop isn't worth his time. He'll have to find a different reason." Lillian looked at the reorganized ledger. "Thank you, Dorothy." "Stop thanking me for things," Dorothy said. "It makes me feel old." She stood up. "Is Elias coming Friday?" "He comes every Friday," Lillian said. "That's not what I meant, and you know it." Lillian looked at her. "I don't know what we are," Lillian said. "We talk. He comes in. We've ridden together twice. He took me to the hill." She paused. "He hasn't said anything." "Have you?" "No." "Why not?" It was the direct version of a question she had been asking herself in the quieter moments of the previous 2 weeks. She had an answer, but it had rough edges. "Because I'm not sure if what I feel is about him specifically or about—" She stopped. "He's the first person in a very long time who has paid attention to me. Really paid attention. Noticed things. Showed up." She pressed her lips together. "I don't know if I'm responding to him or to the fact of being noticed. Those are different things, and I'm not certain I can tell them apart right now." Dorothy was quiet for a moment. "That's a thoughtful concern," she said finally. "Most people don't have it. It's not a virtue. It just means I'm uncertain." "Uncertainty is better than certainty that's wrong," Dorothy said. She picked up her coat. "Elias Ward has been coming into this shop for 3 years. He did not begin talking to you because you noticed him. He was here before you noticed him. He began talking to you because you asked him a question and then you listened to the answer. She looked at Lillian steadily. That's what he responded to, not proximity, you. She moved toward the door. The rest is your own work to figure out. She left. Lillian stood alone in the shop with the reorganized ledger on the back table, an Earnshaw in the corner, and 17 days until Carol arrived from Denver and 2 days until Friday. She went back to work. Elias came in on Friday at his usual time, and when Lillian set his bouquet on the counter, she had added something new, alongside the asters and clover and lavender, 2 stems of goldenrod, deeper yellow than the creek blossoms she used in summer, the color richer and more autumnal against the purple. He looked at it for a moment. Goldenrod, he said. Late season, she said. It'll be gone in 2 weeks. I thought... She stopped deciding whether to explain herself. Amelia saw the mountains change with every season. I thought the bouquet should change too. He picked it up. He looked at the goldenrod in a way that was different from how he looked at the familiar flowers. Longer, more careful. She would have said it looked like the hillside in October, he said, the way the color moves through the grass before the cold comes. Does it look like that to you? Yes, he said, exactly like that. He paid and set the coin on the counter. He didn't move toward the door right away. The lease, he said, signed and returned on Tuesday. Good. He paused. And the Carol meeting? 17 days. I've been going through my records with Dorothy's help, reorganizing the way the numbers are presented. Good, he said again. He had a way of saying good that wasn't a filler word. It was an actual assessment, brief and complete. Elias, she said. He waited. The morning Briggs first came in, she said, before any of it, before I asked you who the flowers were for. Would you have kept coming in forever without saying anything? He considered this. He considered it long enough that she knew he was taking it seriously rather than reaching for an easy answer. Probably, he said. Why? Because the arrangement was working, he said. You made the bouquet. I bought it. I didn't need more than that to continue, and He paused. I wasn't looking for more than that. Were you looking for anything at all? No, he said. Then, after a moment, which is usually when things find you. She looked at him. Is that what happened? She said. Something found you? He held her gaze for a moment. His expression did that thing where it didn't change on the surface, but something moved through it underneath, the way current moves in water that looks still. I think so, he said. I'm still deciding what to do about it. It was the most direct thing he had said about any of it, and it landed in her chest with a kind of weight that was not unpleasant. Take your time, she said. She said it calmly, which was an achievement. He nodded once. He went to the door. Lillian, he said, without turning around. The same way he did it. The pause, the name, the sentence from his back. Yes. The goldenrod was right, he said. Don't overthink it next week. He went out. She stood at the counter for a moment. Then she smiled, which she allowed herself to do because no one could see her. Carol from Garrison Supply arrived on a Wednesday morning in a good coat that had seen real weather and a manner that was direct without being aggressive, which she appreciated. He was perhaps 45, compact and efficient, the kind of man who had done this kind of meeting many times, and was neither trying to impress nor to intimidate. He spent the first 20 minutes looking at the shop. Not the ledger, not her prepared numbers. The actual shop. He walked the displays, picked up items and set them down, asked her one question about a particular dried arrangement in the window, and listened to her answer with the focused attention of someone taking inventory. Then he sat down at her back table, and she put the ledger in front of him. He read it the way Abernathy had read the Briggs papers, without touching it at first, just looking. Then he turned pages slowly. Your lavender movement in summer, he said, finding the column Dorothy had helped her separate. This is from one plant? One plant my mother kept. I dry it and use what it produces. It's not enough to build significant volume on, but the demand suggests if I had reliable supply, I could move considerably more. That's what we're here about, Carol said. He looked at the summer column. You're underselling this line currently. I know. I don't have the supply to support more volume. We can supply it. That's the model. You expand the lines where you have demonstrated demand but limited supply. We provide the wholesale inventory at a rate that allows your margin to remain workable. He turned more pages. Your mixed dried category. I want to understand what's in it. She explained it. He listened. He asked specific questions, and she had specific answers. And she noticed that when she said something he didn't expect, he asked a follow-up rather than moving on, which told her he was genuinely interested in what the shop actually did rather than fitting it into a model he'd brought with him. After an hour, he sat back. What do you know about the shops Garrison currently works with in the territory? He said. Nothing specific, she said. I know you mentioned 3 other shops in your letter. 2 of them are larger than you are. 1 is about your size. He paused. The 2 larger ones have smoother operations, more predictable, lower risk in terms of volume fulfillment. He looked at her steadily. Your shop has something they don't, which is a demonstrated ability to build customer relationships. Your repeat purchase rate, what you've shown me here, is higher than either of the larger shops. People come back to you specifically. They come back because they trust what I know, she said. Yes, he said. That's not a scale advantage. That's a trust advantage. Different thing. He looked at the ledger again. The question is whether a partnership with us would help you extend that advantage into more product lines, or whether the volume requirements would pull you away from what makes you good. It was a more honest question than she had expected from a commercial representative. She looked at him. What are your volume requirements? She said. He named them. They were not as heavy as she had feared, but they would require her to expand her ordering and storage capacity. I would need to expand the back room, she said. I've been looking at the possibility, but I haven't moved on it because I wasn't sure the demand was there. Is the demand there? Carol said. Yes, she said. The demand is there. I've been undersupplying it because I've been under-resourced. Then the partnership makes sense on your end, he said. From ours, I think it works. But I need to bring your numbers back to Denver and confirm with the senior partners before I can give you a formal proposal. He paused. 3 weeks, probably. Maybe 4. I can wait 3 weeks, she said. He nodded. He closed the ledger and slid it back to her. One more question, he said. The lease situation. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that there was a dispute with the building owner. She had not told anyone in the Garrison correspondence about the Briggs situation. She looked at him with a measure of caution. Resolved, she said. 5-year written lease signed 2 weeks ago. Right of first refusal if the property sells. Carol looked at her with a slightly different quality of attention. You negotiated right of first refusal with Harlan Briggs? I did. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Briggs doesn't give that clause. Not as a general rule. He did this time, she said. Carol looked at the ledger, then back at her, and she had the sense that some recalculation was happening. 3 weeks, he said. Maybe 2. He left. Lillian stood at her back table with the ledger and the quiet of the empty shop around her, and the feeling that something had shifted in her direction without her entirely understanding the moment it had happened. She told Elias on Friday. He listened to the whole meeting summary, Carol's manner, the questions he'd asked, the shift when she mentioned the right of first refusal clause. When she finished, Elias was quiet for a moment. He saw the Briggs clause as evidence of something, Elias said. That's what I thought, but I don't know what exactly. That you're not who he expected walking in, Elias said. He came to see a small flower shop and found someone who had negotiated a protection out of one of the harder men in the territory. That's different information than the ledger gave him. Does it help or hurt? Helps, he said. Commercial partnerships depend on more than numbers. They depend on the partner having the, he thought about the word, the spine to defend their own interests. Because if you can't defend against Briggs, you can't hold the line when the wholesale arrangement has a rough quarter. He's assessing whether you're a liability or an asset. And the Briggs clause told him something. It told him you're an asset, Elias said. Yes. She looked at him. I've been thinking, she said, about what you said last Friday. That something found you and you were still deciding what to do about it. The temperature in the room shifted in the way it did when they got near this territory. She had gotten used to identifying it without flinching. He met her eyes. I'm still deciding, he said. Steady, not evasive. How do you decide something like that, she said. When the last time you let something matter, it She stopped. She was asking him to explain grief and rebuilding at the same time, and she wasn't sure that was fair. "I'm sorry. That's not a question you can answer simply." "No," he said, "but it's the right question." I was quiet for a moment. "I've been going up to the hill more than once a week," he said. She waited. "Since you came with me," he said, "I've gone up 3 times in the last 2 weeks. Not every time with the flowers. Sometimes just going." He seemed to be choosing his words with particular care. "I think I'm trying to do what I told you about. The 2 things existing at the same time. Her memory and whatever is happening now. I'm trying to find out if they can." "Can they?" she said softly. "I think so," he said. "I'm not certain, but I think so." She nodded. "I'm not asking you to be certain," she said. "I'm not certain about anything right now either. The shop, Garrison, all of it. She paused. "I'm just glad you're trying to figure it out." "So am I," he said. "For the first time in a while, so am I." He picked up his bouquet. The goldenrod was gone for the season, so she had added dried seed heads that gave the arrangement a different texture, something between summer and winter in a single handful. And he held it the way he always held it, with that careful, deliberate weight. He was almost to the door. "Lillian," he said. I know, she said. "I know." He paused for just a moment, then he went out. She did not entirely know, but she knew enough. Dorothy Meacham came in on Saturday for no apparent reason and spent 20 minutes rearranging a display she said was imbalanced, which was Dorothy's way of checking on a person without saying that was what she was doing. "Carol's visit went well," Lillian told her. "I know, I saw him leaving. He had the look of a man who got more than he expected. He mentioned you might hear back in 2 weeks instead of 3. "Good," Dorothy said. She adjusted a jar of dried sage. "And Friday?" Lillian was quiet for a moment. "He said he thinks the 2 things can coexist," Lillian said. "Her memory and whatever's happening." Dorothy stopped adjusting the sage. She turned to look at Lillian fully. "He said that," Dorothy said. "Yes." "Out loud. To you." "Yes." Dorothy looked away for a moment toward the window, and Lillian saw something in her profile that was more than satisfaction, something older and more complicated. The expression of a woman who had watched a person grieve for 3 years and was seeing the first real evidence of what comes after. "Amelia used to say he was the most careful man she had ever met," Dorothy said quietly. She meant it as the highest compliment she knew how to give. She said he would carry a thing slowly and carefully, and when he set it down, it would be in exactly the right place. She paused. She was right. He has been carrying his grief exactly that way. She looked back at Lillian. When he sets it down, when he finds the right place for it, it will be permanent. Lillian absorbed this. "That's a lot of weight," Lillian said. "Yes," Dorothy said. "It's also a lot of fidelity. Those 2 things come from the same place in a person." She went back to the sage. Then she picked up her coat and her flowers and left. Lillian sat with that for a long time. Fidelity and weight, the same source. She thought about the 67 Fridays before she had asked her question, and the 7 Fridays since. She thought about a man who had learned a road by traveling it, and who noticed which way her mare drifted on bad surfaces, and who let people think they were getting away with things when they weren't. She thought about lavender in a clay pot on a windowsill, because the wind was too much for it outside. She went to the back counter and looked at her mother's lavender plant. Smaller in winter, the leaves pale but still alive, still holding. And she thought that some things survived by being moved inside when the conditions outside were too harsh, and that this was not defeat but intelligence. She had moved inside after her mother died. She had stayed inside for years, building and maintaining and surviving, which was its own kind of strength and also its own kind of cage. Something was asking her to consider the window again, to check whether the conditions outside had changed. She didn't know if they had. She suspected they might have. She picked up her pen and started a letter she had not planned to write. Not to Garrison, not to Abernathy, not practical correspondence of any kind. She wrote 3 lines and stopped and looked at them and crossed out the second line and wrote it differently and then looked at all 3 again. They said what she meant. Not perfectly, but honestly. She folded the paper and held it for a while without deciding what to do with it. Outside, the October wind moved through Millfield the same as it always did. indifferent to everything below it. In the corner, Earnshaw sat in its pot, alive and belligerent and unimpressed as always. Lillian set the folded paper on her desk. She would decide about it later. She had gotten better, these past weeks, at understanding that not every decision needed to be made immediately, and that some things were worth holding carefully until you knew exactly where they were supposed to go. Elias Ward had taught her that, without meaning to, by example. She thought that was probably the most useful kind of teaching. The letter sat on her desk for 9 days. She moved it twice, once when she needed the desk space for the garrison preparation, once when Dorothy came by and she didn't want to answer questions about it, but she always put it back in the same place, slightly right of center, where she could see it without looking directly at it. She had read it probably a dozen times. 3 lines, honest, not perfect. She kept thinking she should rewrite it, make it better, find language that said the same thing with less exposure. But every time she tried, the new version said something slightly different, something more careful, more hedged. And careful and hedged were not what she had meant when she wrote it at midnight with the lavender smell in the air and Dorothy's words still sitting in her chest. Fidelity and weight from the same source. She left the letter where it was. The garrison response came on a Thursday, 14 days after Carol's visit, which was faster than he'd promised, and which she chose to read as a good sign while simultaneously telling herself not to read anything into timing. It was a formal letter from the senior partners in Denver. They were pleased to offer Rosewood Mercantile a wholesale partnership arrangement. The terms followed: supply commitments, pricing structure, the volume minimums Carol had mentioned, a clause about seasonal flexibility that she read 3 times because it was more favorable than she had expected. She sat at her back table for a long time after reading it. This was the thing she had been afraid of for 4 months. The letter she hadn't sent because the no was easier to avoid than to receive. And now there was no no. There was a yes, laid out in careful commercial language on good paper with a Denver postmark, and she was sitting with it trying to understand why her first reaction was something close to vertigo rather than relief. She thought about what Elias had said about the simplicity she made complicated. He was right, and she knew it, and knowing it didn't make the vertigo go away. It just meant she understood what it was. She was afraid of yes. She had been afraid of yes for longer than she'd been afraid of no, because yes meant she had to do the thing, and doing the thing meant she could fail at it, and failing at something she'd wanted was categorically worse than never having tried. She pressed her palms flat on the table. She looked at the letter. Yes, she said aloud. To herself, to the shop, to no one in particular. The answer is yes. She got out her pen and began drafting her acceptance. She told him on Friday. She had the letter ready when he came in, set on the counter beside his bouquet, and when he walked through the door, she pushed them both toward him simultaneously. He looked at the garrison letter first because it was closer. He read the relevant portion. "You're accepting," he said, "not a question." "I'm accepting," she said. He set the letter down. He looked at her. "How do you feel?" he said. "Terrified," she said, "and ready. Mostly terrified." "Those usually go together," he said, "when it's the right thing." He picked up his bouquet. She had added 2 stems of late autumn berries alongside the usual arrangement, small dark clusters that sat well against the pale dried lavender, and he noticed them the way he always noticed things, without announcing the noticing. "Berries," he said, "wild ones, from the creek bank before the frost takes them." She paused. She saw the mountains change with every season. The bouquet should keep doing the same. He held it and looked at it for a long moment. Something in his face had been different these past weeks. Not easier exactly, but less contained, like a hand that had been holding something tightly for a long time and was slowly, deliberately choosing to loosen. "Lillian," he said. She waited. "I went up to the hill yesterday," he said. "I've been going up more than once a week, as I told you. Yesterday I went and He stopped. He seemed to be finding the words the same way a man finds his footing on uneven ground, carefully, testing the surface. "I talk to her. I do that sometimes. I tell her things." "What did you tell her?" He looked at the counter, then he looked at her. "I told her about you," he said, "about the lavender from your mother's plant, about you asking who the flowers were for, and then just proceeding to act like the answer was something normal to acknowledge rather than something to tiptoe around." He paused. I told her you'd gone with me to the hill and stood there without flinching and asked me to tell you something true about her, not the kind thing, a real thing. Lillian was very still. She would have found that funny, she said. The snoring. He made that sound again, the brief, unguarded laugh that changed his whole face. She would have denied it. You would have let her. I always did, he said. The quiet that followed was the comfortable kind, the kind they had developed over weeks of sitting in the space between what was said and what didn't need to be. What else did you tell her? Lillian asked. I told her I thought she would have liked you, he said. Specifically, not in a general sense. I told her the particular reasons. He held her gaze. The way you read every line of a contract before you sign it. The way you named a fern after a fictional character because your mother did, and you kept the habit without examining why. The way you added lavender to a dead woman's bouquet because it belonged there, without asking anyone's permission. Lillian felt something press against the inside of her sternum. Not painful, the opposite. What did she say? Lillian said softly. When you told her. He was quiet for a moment. Nothing, he said. She's been gone 3 years. She doesn't say anything. He paused. But I know what she would have said. She would have told me to stop being an idiot. Lillian looked at him. About what specifically? She said, very carefully. He set the bouquet down on the counter. He had never done that before. Always held it, always moved toward the door. He set it down and he looked at her directly with that undeflected quality that she had learned was just how he looked at things he took seriously. About not saying what I mean, he said, while I still have the chance to say it. The shop was very quiet. Then say it, she said. He was quiet for a moment, not from uncertainty, she thought, but from the same carefulness with which he did everything. The deliberate, tested placing of weight before committing to it. I've been in this shop every Friday for 3 years, he said. The first 2 years and 40-some weeks. I came in, I bought flowers, I left. I wasn't here for you. I was here for routine, for the only ritual I could manage to hold on to. He paused. And then you asked who they were for. And you told me. I didn't have to, he said. I could have said it was personal, and you would have let it go. You're not the kind of woman who pushes past a closed door. He looked at her steadily. I told you because I wanted to. Because you asked directly, and you were looking at me like my grief was something ordinary to acknowledge rather than something to manage carefully around. And I hadn't had anyone look at me that way in 3 years. Lillian did not say anything. She knew better than to interrupt when someone was saying the true thing. I don't know exactly when it changed, he said. When you became someone I was coming in to see rather than someone I was coming in to make a transaction with. I don't think it happened at a specific moment. It was accumulated. The lavender, the receipts, Carpenter's Crossing, the hill. He picked up the bouquet again because his hands needed something to do. I have been going up to that hill and trying to figure out if a man can carry 2 things at once without one of them collapsing. If grief for someone you lost, and whatever this is, can exist in the same space without either of them being false. Can they? She said. Yes, he said. I think yes. It took me a while to get there, and I'm not entirely there yet, but I think yes. He paused. What I know is that I have spent 3 years making sure I wasn't forgetting her. I have done that faithfully, and I think she would say that I have done my part, and that the rest of my life is still the rest of my life. Lillian felt the press against her sternum again, stronger now. Elias, she said, the letter on my desk, the one I wrote 9 days ago and haven't sent. He looked at her. It's for you, she said. He was very still. 3 lines, she said. I've been trying to rewrite it for 9 days, and every time I do, it comes out wrong, because the rewritten version is more careful than what I actually mean. What do you actually mean? He said. She had rehearsed this approximately 0 times, which was either a mistake or the only way to do it honestly. I mean that I have been alone in this shop for 6 years doing everything myself, she said, and I became very good at doing everything myself, and I told myself that was sufficient, and it was enough to survive on. And then you started talking to me, and I started talking back, and I realized I had forgotten what it felt like to have someone notice things about me. Not the shop. Me. She paused. The way you told me I made complicated things that were actually simple. The way you drove that wagon to Carpenter's Crossing and didn't say a word about the 5 minutes I was late. The way you sat in that chair at the Briggs negotiation and didn't speak the whole time because you knew I needed to speak for myself. Those aren't extraordinary things, he said. They are to me, she said, because nobody had done them in a very long time. He was quiet. He looked at the counter, then at the bouquet in his hands. I'm not easy, he said. I want to be clear about that. I don't talk about things readily. I'm slow in general. I live alone on a ranch, and I eat breakfast before sunrise, and I am not going to become a different kind of man. I'm not asking you to, she said. And I will keep going up to that hill, he said. I'm not going to stop. That's not negotiable. I would not want you to stop, she said. Then, that is not something you should ever stop. He looked at her. Something settled in his face. The specific relief of a man who had been braced for a condition he couldn't meet, discovering it wasn't being asked of him. The letter, he said. What do the 3 lines say? She had thought about reading it to him. She had thought about going upstairs and getting it and handing it over. Instead, she just said it from memory, because she had read it enough times that it was there. I think you are worth choosing, she said. I think we are both still learning how to live forward instead of only backward. I would like to learn it at the same time as you, if you're willing. The silence that followed was not the comfortable kind or the charged kind. It was a different kind, the kind that comes when something true has been said plainly and the air needs a moment to adjust to it. He set the bouquet on the counter again. He reached into his coat pocket. He set something beside the bouquet, a small clay pot, cracked along one side, very old, with a dried stub of something in it that had been dead for years. She stared at it. Amelia's lavender pot, she said. I told you I gave it to Dorothy Meacham because I couldn't look at it, he said. I went and got it back last Tuesday. I've been carrying it in my coat for 4 days because I didn't know what to do with it, and then I realized I did know what to do with it. Lillian looked at the pot. Cracked on one side, the crack repaired badly with some kind of clay mixture that had dried to a different color. Old soil in the bottom, very dry. It can't grow anything anymore, he said. The pot's too damaged and the soil's too far gone, but... He paused. Your mother's plant. The lavender you've been drying and adding to the bouquets for 3 years. Could you take a cutting, propagate from it? She looked at him. She understood what he was asking. Yes, she said. I could start a new plant from a cutting, put it in this pot. She looked at the cracked clay. The crack would need to be properly sealed if we're going to hold soil and water. I know how to work with clay, he said. I can fix the crack. She reached out and picked up the pot. She turned it in her hands. The crack ran from just below the rim to about halfway down, the amateur repair visible but not shameful. Just the mark of someone who had tried to preserve something rather than let it go. Her lavender in your mother's cutting, he said. I thought... He stopped. I thought it was the right shape for what we're trying to do. 2 things in the same space. She looked at him over the pot. Yes, she said. And then, because 3 lines in a letter and 1 word were not quite enough for the size of what she meant. Elias. Yes. He picked up his bouquet. He held it the way he always held it, with that deliberate, careful weight. But something in it was different, not lighter, more complete maybe. The way a thing feels when it's finally carrying exactly what it's meant to carry, not more, not less. I'll come back tomorrow, he said, with the clay. I'll have the cutting ready, she said. He went to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame, and she thought he was going to say her name again, the way he did. From his back, the pause. The sentence arriving without him turning around. But he turned around. He looked at her for a moment, directly, with that undeflected quality that she had come to understand was not blankness, but its opposite. Full attention, nothing held back. Thank you, he said, for asking who they were for. Then he went out. The bell above the door swung and stilled. Lillian stood at her counter holding a cracked clay pot with dead soil in it, and the smell of lavender in the air, and the October wind moving through the street outside, and she thought, this is how things actually start. Not with declarations or perfect moments, with a cracked pot and a cutting and someone willing to do the slow work of repair. Oh. He came back the next morning at 8, before she opened, with a small leather pouch of clay compound and a tool she didn't recognize that he told her was for working seams. He sat at her back table and worked on the pot with the focused quiet of a man who was good with his hands and didn't need to perform the goodness. She took the cutting from her mother's lavender plant, from the healthiest branch, at the right angle, the way her mother had taught her, and prepared it in water to root while the pot repair dried. It took him 40 minutes. The repaired crack was not invisible, but it was solid, properly sealed, the different color of the new clay running cleanly along the line rather than patched unevenly over it. "It looks repaired," she said. "Not hidden." "It is repaired," he said. "Not hidden." He looked at it. "I thought about trying to color match the clay, but that seemed like the wrong approach." "It's the wrong approach," she agreed. "If you hide the crack, you forget it's there. Then it surprises you later." He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "Exactly." The cutting rooted over the following 3 weeks. She kept it in water on the back counter where the light was good, and she watched it daily with the particular attention of someone waiting for proof that something can survive being separated from its source. On the day she transferred it to the repaired pot, when the roots were strong enough to hold in soil, she went upstairs and got the 3-line letter from her desk and brought it down and set it on the counter. Elias was there. He had taken to stopping by the shop on days that weren't Friday, not always with a particular reason, sometimes with a question about the ranch accounts she had offered to help him organize since his record-keeping was functional but chaotic, sometimes with nothing at all except the fact of being there. She handed him the letter. He read it. He had already heard the words, but he read them anyway, slowly, the way he read everything. He folded it and put it in his shirt pocket. "I'm keeping this," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I gave it to you." She set the cutting in the repaired pot. She pressed the soil around it carefully, the way her mother had taught her, firmly enough to support the roots, but not packed so tightly that nothing could breathe. Elias watched. "Will it take?" he said. "Probably," she said. "Lavender is stubborn if you give it the right conditions." "What are the right conditions?" "Good drainage, enough light, not too much water. It drowns easier than it dries out." She sat back. "And patience. It's slow to establish. People give up on it because nothing seems to be happening, but it's working underground where you can't see it." He looked at the pot on the counter, his clay, her mother's cutting, Amelia's soil underneath it all, the repair visible along one side. "I can be patient," he said. "I know," she said. "That's one of the things I'm counting on." The Garrison partnership launched in the spring. Carol came back in February with the formal contract, which Lillian read line by line, all of it, and signed. The inventory expansion required the backroom renovation she had been calculating, and Elias helped her plan it over 3 evenings at her back table with a sketch she made, and his corrections added in pencil alongside hers. Not overriding what she'd drawn, just extending it where the structural questions went beyond her knowledge. "You've been in this building longer than you've had the contract," he said one evening, looking at the sketch. "You know where the walls want to be." "I know where the walls are," she said. "Not always where they want to be." "Same thing," he said, "with buildings and most other things." The renovation took 6 weeks and was messier and more expensive than she had hoped, and less catastrophic than she had feared, which was about the best outcome available for any construction project in a working building. When it was finished, the back room held twice what it had before, and the first Garrison shipment arrived in early April when the wildflowers were beginning in the fields east of Millfield. Dorothy Meacham came in the day the shipment arrived and looked at the new inventory with the satisfaction of a woman surveying a thing she had observed in the making. "Your mother would have done the same thing," Dorothy said. "Eventually, she was working toward it." "I know," Lillian said. "I think I was working toward it too without knowing it." "Most important things happen that way," Dorothy said. She looked around the expanded shop. "Are you going to rename it?" "No," Lillian said. "It's still Rosewood Mercantile. It's always been Rosewood Mercantile." Dorothy nodded as if this was the correct answer. Elias kept going to the hill on Fridays. This was a fixed point, as Lillian had said it would always be. He went up with his bouquet, asters and clover and lavender from the plant on her back counter, and whatever the season offered alongside it, berries or goldenrod, or the creek blossoms in summer. And he stayed for however long he stayed, and he came back down. Some Fridays Lillian went with him. Some Fridays she didn't, because it was not always her place to be there, and she understood the difference. On the Fridays she went, They talked or they didn't, and both were fine. One Friday in May, when the hillside was coming back to color after the winter, she was standing near the marker with Elias, and she looked at the valley spread below and understood for the first time completely what Elias Ward had loved about this view. It was not just that it was beautiful, it was that from up here everything had scale, the town small below, the mountains enormous beyond, and between them the whole working distance of a life being lived. She was right, Lillian said. Best view in Wyoming. She was right about most things, Elias said. She was wrong about the snoring. She knew about the snoring. She absolutely knew, he said. She just decided it wasn't a problem she needed to acknowledge. Lillian laughed. It was the full kind, the kind that came without warning. He watched her laugh with an expression that she had come to recognize as something he didn't have a word for and wasn't trying to name, just an open, unguarded recognition of something present. She had learned to recognize it because it was the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching. They were both, she had decided, better at watching than at being caught. The lavender plant took through the winter and came back in the spring with new growth at the base, pale green shoots pushing up from the root system that had been quietly establishing itself in Amelia's clay pot since October. She showed Elias the first morning she found the new growth. He crouched beside the pot on the back counter and looked at the shoots for a long time without speaking. "There it is," he said. "Slow to establish," she said, "but working underground where you can't see it." He looked up at her. "You were right," he said, "about the patience." "You were right about the repair," she said. "The crack needed to be solid, not hidden." He stood. He was close enough to the counter that they were standing closer than the transactional distance of a shop, closer than even the comfortable distance they'd settled into over months of back-table evenings. She did not step back, and neither did he. Lillian, he said. "Yes. I'm going to ask you something, and I'm going to ask it plainly because you've told me you appreciate directness, and because I am genuinely incapable of doing this any other way." "Ask it," she said. "I would like the rest of my Fridays to be here," he said, "not just passing through, not just the transaction and the door." He paused. "I would like them to be yours, and the Saturdays, and the days I don't have a particular reason to come in, but I come anyway." He looked at her steadily with all the undeflected attention he had. "I'm asking if you want that too." She looked at him. She thought about the letter she had written at midnight that had taken 9 days to give him. She thought about the cracked pot and the cutting and the roots working underground in the dark where no one could see them. She thought about a woman she had never met who grew lavender on a windowsill because the Wyoming wind was too much for it outside, and a man who had carried that woman's memory up a hill every week for 3 years with a faithfulness that was not performance but simple, stubborn love. She thought about her mother's fern, belligerent in the corner, alive through sheer refusal to be otherwise. She thought about what she had said to herself the day she signed the lease. Not comfortable, but not impossible. And she thought about the way some things, most things, the things that mattered, did not announce themselves as the beginning of something. They just kept showing up, week after week. Same time, same careful hands, same exact coin on the counter. Until one day you asked who they were for, and everything changed from the inside out. "Yes," she said. "I want that." He nodded once. He did not reach for her or make it into a moment larger than it was. He just stood in her shop in the morning light with the lavender growing new and green behind him and looked at her like she was something worth being careful with. "Then I'll be here Friday," he said. "You're always here Friday," she said. "Now you know why," he said. There is a particular kind of person who keeps showing up. Not the dramatic arrival, not the grand gesture, just the ordinary faithful return. Week after week, same road, same careful hands. Most people walk past them. They don't announce themselves. They don't make claims. They bring their wildflowers, and they pay their exact coin, and they disappear into the hills, and you can watch them for 3 years without understanding what you're looking at. What you're looking at is the rarest thing there is. Someone who means what they do. Someone who keeps a promise nobody required them to keep, long after the person they made it to is gone. We spend a lot of our lives afraid of the wrong things. Afraid of trying and failing, afraid of wanting and not getting, afraid of asking a question that might not have a good answer. We build very careful routines around the fear. We maintain them faithfully, and we call the maintenance strength, Sometimes it is strength. And sometimes it is the very long way around to realizing that the door was not locked from the outside. Lillian Harper asked one question. Not a dramatic question, not a confrontation, just 3 words from behind a flower shop counter on a Friday afternoon. Who are they for? She asked it because she was tired of holding it, because Harlan Briggs had set a bouquet down sideways that morning, and she was angry, and anger is sometimes the thing that moves us when sense keeps us still. She did not know she was asking Elias Ward to come back to the living. She was just asking a question. He answered it because she was looking at him like grief was something ordinary to acknowledge rather than something to manage carefully around. That was all. That was enough. People think love announces itself. It doesn't, most of the time. Most of the time it arrives in the gap between what you needed and what you found. Lavender in a bouquet when you were only expecting asters. A person sitting beside you in a chair when you had to walk into a room you were afraid of. A wagon at 6 in the morning on a bad road. You didn't know how to navigate alone. It arrives in the cracked pot and the cutting and the 3 lines you write at midnight and carry for 9 days because you're not sure where to put them yet. It arrives in the roots working underground while you wait and watch and try to remember that slow establishment is not the same thing as failure. The lavender came back in the spring. It came back green and stubborn and entirely unimpressed by the winter it had survived. The same way the fern in the corner came back. The same way Lillian Harper came back from every hard thing that had tried to take something from her. The same way Elias Ward came back to his own life, slowly, by returning every Friday to a hill where someone he loved was buried. Until one day a florist asked him a question and he chose to answer it. It is not a perfect story. It has a cracked pot in it, and a man who is slow with words and difficult to know, and a woman who makes things complicated because she is afraid of how much she wants them to be simple. It has grief in it that never entirely goes away. It has the ordinary, improbable fact of 2 people finding each other in the middle of their separate losses and deciding, without fanfare, to keep showing up. That is the whole of it. That is all it is. And from up on that hill, with the mountains laid out west and the valley below, and the wildflowers in the grass coming back year after year, the way wildflowers do, it is exactly